The reason I was interested in joining the Army is I'm fourth generation Army. I'm an Army brat, I could consider myself to be that, and grew up around veterans and had that experience of also being military family. I saw how operations can affect both the veteran and the family, and I was quite passionate about, I think we could do more to support mental health and wellbeing. So that drew me towards the Army. I then went to uni and did psychology, and with that was particularly interested in trauma, and particularly combat trauma. So with that combination, I thought being a military psychologist would be perfect. My background is a specialist service officer, so it's like a doctor, we've got the padres, dentists, etc. We do civilian university and join, and then when we go to Duntroon, we just do a shorter course. We don't do the full 18 months like the GSOs. 2003 is when I joined. So I was in training for the 2 years, like equivalent of on-the-job training, and then became a fully qualified psychologist after that. I think some of this, because it's new, it's even across the board, so it wasn't like we were able to have lessons learned from other nations. I think everyone was struggling to respond to this as well. You're kind of learning as you go, and an example of that is trying to normalise reactions. So when you're seeing things for the first time, like trauma symptoms, learning not to overreact to them. I think sometimes we get very confused with what is PTSD and what is a normal reaction to a very intense scenario. And the other thing is what's just adjustment issues, like not being able to sleep when you come back from a war zone. I don't see that as necessarily something to be concerned about. It's an adjustment issue, not medicalising everything. I think people go two ways coming back. You have some people, and people refer to particularly grandparents' age, where it was never spoken about. And then the other way is people do want to vent and get it off their chest and will speak quite openly about those experiences. So I experienced both of those and thought it set me up well for going into the military to be a psychologist, because I'd heard those stories and those exposures. I was very lucky because I had a secondment with, it was then the Australian Centre for Post-Traumatic Mental Health, so I went there for a 2-year period, and so they're the experts in post-traumatic health. And through that I was supervised with counselling Vietnam vets, so through exposure therapy. So I did have that experience of what it's like to take someone through numerous sessions to address trauma, and I feel that I was very blessed to have that opportunity. So going in with that expertise, we're well prepared in that sense, but as I said, it's difficult, the actual rawness of counselling someone in a war zone with that intensity of emotion. So my first deployment to Iraq was in 2005, and it was about only for 1 month, and the purpose of that is we just brought in screening. And so with the mental health screening we do, it's not targeted for if someone's been exposed to something in particular. We brought in that everyone should receive a screen before they return to Australia to make sure if they're doing okay, need extra assistance, and to help them with their reintegration back into normal life and with their families. What I've learnt is people have very individual responses and experiences. We can't just blanket what it's like to be in a war zone. Very much depends not only the role and experiences that a person has, but their own, people bring baggage as well and perceive scenarios differently. Another thing is about how much support they have and the quality of leadership. So I found it's a very individual response to those experiences. In 2010 in Afghanistan, I was involved in providing the mental health response, the critical incident response to the death of 2 combat engineers and also the military working dog. And that involved psychologists. We usually we've got a delayed response, we don't go out immediately, and part of that is so that we support normal coping skills. So what happens is about 3 days after the event, we will actually push our psych team forward, which is usually a psychologist and a psych soldier examiner, forward to where the event occurred. And then we do the screening, which is to see if there's any trauma reactions. But in that scenario as well, we're also seeing how the whole team's going, how they're interacting, providing emotional support in relation to grief as well. I say that it's the most rewarding but challenging experience. Challenging, as you can expect, very raw emotion after an event like that. But very rewarding, I always find with critical incident response, is the level of resilience that is demonstrated from, it could be people's first deployment. We've got, young people with a lot of responsibility, and I think it kind of takes your breath away with the level of the resilience in response to those scenarios. Also the level of leadership from some of our very young or junior leaders, particularly like our corporals, bringing their team together, putting the team above their own needs, being able to bounce back and focus on the mission, and also the amount of emotional support that they're able to provide team members as well, which is shocking, but I think it's, for some, but in a positive way, the level of emotional intelligence, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say, that I see from our leaders as well. So with the screening, we don't just focus on tell me what went wrong or what you were challenged by, but we can sometimes, and luckily often, say, you dealt with that scenario really well. Can you talk me through what was going through your head? What I see with that is it's a lot of reliance on training, so that comes up a lot and helps people when there's a critical incident, is just going into that zone. And also the other thing is the support from team members, and if there's good leadership as well, gets people through it as well. It's an interesting experience as a military psychologist. You won't have it if you're a civilian back here as a psych, as you're embedded with the group and you also relate very strongly with them. You're wearing the same uniform and in the same environment, seeing similar experiences, but also providing emotional support. So we've got a bit of a dual relationship happening there. You get very drawn to those people that you're supporting because you're part of the team as well. It's different from just having a stranger come in asking for counselling as well. So it's trying to get that balance as well and check your own reactions to the scenarios. One of the most rewarding experiences working in your own small team, not just with your psych soldier, but the support that the Padres, medical team and the psych provide each other as well, not only to those that they're responding to, but the emotional support and peer supervision and that. I think that's how we get through those intense scenarios ourselves. A question I often get asked is who psychs the psych? And we work in those teams that's multidisciplinary with the Padre and usually the doctor, because we're all seeing similar things. And I think what's really important is to acknowledge in the team that it's normal to have your own reactions or even your own grief reactions when there's an incident occurs. To speak openly about that, but also to talk, there's the other side is professionally how you're going to respond as a team and be a united front with advice that we provide to command as well. And that's how I believe it's done. It's difficult because the things that we're dealing with are medical and psych and confidence. You can't just run off and seek advice from whoever you wish. And so that's why that little group of the Padre, the doctor and the psych works really well. Towards the end of the deployment, so I only had a short deployment of 4.5 months, I didn't want to go back. You get very involved in it and it's very hard to let go. I think it's probably not just psychs that feel that way, especially if you're leaving halfway through their tour and someone takes your place. There is a level of concern how they're all going to go and a regret about having to go back home. On reflection, when I got home, it was good that I understand why they only have 4.5 months, because you do burn out. You're not aware of it at the time. And it's not just psychs, but it takes time to sit and reflect and look back and just see how much it was taking out of you. In my role, it's how much it takes, the emotional burden. When you're in the mix of it, you're just really focused and it's all hyper, but then there is that kind of tipping point where you need to recover. For me, arriving back, psychs are not immune. We also have difficulty adjusting back to normal life. What really helps is talking to peers who have been through a similar scenario and really normalising these reactions, like feeling that you've let people down by having to come back mid deployment, for example. That you felt that you could have done more, which is, I think, a lot of anyone in helping profession, that's always in the back of their mind. So speaking to people like that and being open as a professional and noting that you're not immune is very important as well, and I think assists in the process. I've had a deployment as a lieutenant, a captain and a major. It's a lot of trades. The ones, the worker bees are actually the junior officers doing the trade, and then the higher ones are the managers. So we do send over, it's lieutenant and captain level that are going and doing the counselling, and the major is usually the supervisor. It's interesting because you can go in and as a junior psychologist, so you might be a young captain and you are the only psychologist in Afghanistan. You also have a psych soldier that supports in the admin and does the screening, but you might be very junior officer and the only psychologist. How that impacts is we have a range of age groups and different ranks coming in, different genders, people from very different experiences. And I know when I was junior, I was conscious of, would they even take, a junior, a female psych officer seriously and feel that would they open up to me? And it's interesting that I think people do, but it's only behind the closed doors, and that it's not held against you. I think in that scenario, if you've got the skill set, people do open up. And that's what it's good at. This is what I was talking about before, about we work in those teams, we support each other because we do have very similar experiences, and it's really good to just say that out loud. I struggled today because I had a very raw experience with someone, or someone broke down and it triggered something in me. And then to have people that you trust, it's also outside of psychology, having a doctor say, I struggled, or the padre to say, I found this hard too and it's okay, really helps you get through it. Since I've been back, I've gone into more management roles and staff officer roles. So I've gone through all the deployments and the counselling and the intensity of that to a desk job. And that takes adjustment in itself. So there is that frustration that you're not getting. I think one of the most rewarding things about being a psychologist is you get that instant reward. You sit with someone, they tell you a story, and your aim is to, at least in that hour that you've got, make it a little bit better for them. You're missing out on that stuff where you might be doing things at a higher level that are very important, like a mental health strategy, but to see the outcomes and significance of that takes years, even a generation. So that takes time to adjust to. I'm very much looking forward to going into command role and it's for the psychs that deploy, and being able to use my own experiences I had as a junior psychologist going over there to assist others. And I think one of the things I will be pushing is to be very open if people are having reactions, making sure they get that supervision that they need when they're junior, and also that emotional support as well for when we're putting junior specialists out there, sometimes quite isolated, into quite intense clinical scenarios. I think it's really important to acknowledge that. It's very hard to train for, under intense scenarios, being able to deal with very raw emotion. And I think that's something that only comes with experience and day in, day out, especially if you're the only psychologist in a location, you will be seeing people back to back, and if they're all talking about their trauma, that's quite a heavy burden that we place on our junior officers, and something that's very hard to train for. In relation to how do I the admin or how do I conduct therapy. I felt that I was well prepared for that. It's more the actual, the human experience of doing it for real on operations that's very hard to prepare for. At the time, I thought there was something wrong with me because I'm feeling emotions. I should just be a blank slate with this and provide advice. And life's not like that, and I don't think you realise that, at a young age. And one of the best things I found is that peer support and supervision when I get back, normalising. Of course, you're going to have reactions, and in fact, it's a double-edged sword. What makes someone a good psychologist is probably because they do care. The other side of that is because they do care, they're going to have a reaction to that. And I think it's really important just to be very open about that and normalise it. One of my favourite things is to go to war memorials. So not just here, but every time I go to another country, I will always go to their war memorial. For me, I've always been fascinated in military history, but it also feels like a place of belonging for me. I think I'm very much impacted by growing up in a military family. I like to see also not just reading the military history, but you can see it from the artwork and that the experiences that we have now, for example, having emotional reactions in a war zone or having mental health reactions is throughout all the different generations. So we might be a younger generation, but we've also, some of the stuff is just a theme throughout the experience of being in the military. It's something that doesn't change with, time or age.